Vegan Launch is the first public vegan investment crowdfunding platform. And so when you can bring earlier we talked about minimum investments of 25,000, 50,000, 500,000. In investment crowdfunding, typically the minimum investment is $100. So this means you can bring in a lot of people. So you're going to educate a lot of people. The risk is being spread. So no one person is taking on a risk that is inappropriate for their wealth level. That's so now the risk is spread. Now that doesn't mean we just want to throw money at the problem. Vegan Launch tries to minimize risk even more by providing really expert quality mentoring to as many vegan entrepreneurs as we can. So the more investors we can bring in and the more entrepreneurs we can mentor. But the basic point is when you go for the whole market, you now sidestepping the venture capital bottleneck.
To frame up this interview, I think I mentioned to you that I'm doing the Creating the Vegan World documentary, and it's starting off as a YouTube series, and I'll put on the podcast where it just outlines what's going on behind the scenes of creating a vegan world. So when the mainstream sees there's more plant-based foods in the meat section, and then there's more people going vegan, they might just say, okay, wonder why it's happening. So this goes behind the scenes, and I interview people who are just, I guess you do the work, and then you see the results. So my previous investor interview, I interviewed Michiel van Dersen, who's an angel investor and has a new VC fund. And then he talks about what him and other investors do to put money in vegan businesses. But I remember when we were speaking the other day, you said there's probably trillions of dollars that everyday investors have in the stock market, and there's the new crowdfunding laws that could allow even more money from the vegan community go into vegan businesses and help launch it and scale it from there.
I think we discussed this before 1933, there were no finance laws, so anybody could sell anything to anybody. Then with the Securities Act and the Investment Company Act, it became illegal to do unregistered public offers. So you had to register with the SEC. The public offers became illegal, and then private offers were limited to 100 investors, and they all had to be what's called accredited, which meant they were wealthy. The idea was if you were already wealthy, you were sophisticated enough to not put your money into bad deals. So that ended the public solicitation for capital, which really constrained capital. And now we're at the kind of end of that, where the only real liquidity is on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. So it's, and then the VC funds had to really, in a way, emerge in order to fill in this capitalization gap, but it's just a very narrow funnel and also incredibly conservative in terms of their tastes, like what industries they think matter. And just like politics, the politicians are always years, even decades behind the people.
Definitely.
It is nice. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so it's about the design of the VC fund is if you're, let's say, a very tiny venture capital fund would be $50 million. I mean, there are micro funds now that are less, but the logic of that is you get a 2% management fee, which is $1 million a year in revenue. That's not a lot of money of revenue for a business. And that kind of business has an awful lot of very expensive legal fees and a lot of travel. And, everything about running a venture capital fund is expensive. So at 50 million, there's only $1 million in revenue a year. But if you take 50 million and divide it by the maximum number of investors, which is 100, that means the average check is $500,000 a piece. And $500,000 a piece is out of reach for most millionaires. Like if I have $1 million in the bank, or in my portfolio, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission, I could invest $500,000 1,000 of that, but I'd be a fool to put, half my portfolio in a high risk. The idea is high risk, high return investment. So that's not a very diversified strategy. So instead, the kind of people who invest in these funds are like, college endowment funds, retirement accounts that have billions under management. And for them, writing a $500,000 or $1 million or even larger check is not a significant risk, but they are very conservative, and they're very, the first rule you might say is don't lose any money, which still happens in VC funds anyway. But now you're dealing with this dynamic. You're raising large amounts of money, and because of the way the business works, you have to get that money invested. So that means that VC funds are filtering for companies that are already at a pretty high attainment level. So where's the problem there? The problem is that companies don't start at the VC grade. They start in somebody's kitchen table or on a napkin at the idea level, and then the process begins. So first capital, people talk, in the entrepreneur literature, they talk about your friends and family round. Well, that still presumes that you have friends and family who are A, wealthy, and B, risk tolerant, and C, believe in what you're doing, and D, are sophisticated enough not to do something really stupid. And even then, 90% of those companies are going to fail because they're not going to get the right mentoring. And the next thing you know, now the entrepreneur has got to face the family after having lost all their money. So that whole methodology for financing, that might be great for the country club scene, but it's not really a broad-based approach to entrepreneurship. And what you find is that there are only a few places in the US where an entrepreneur can reliably raise capital, which is Silicon Valley, maybe New York, maybe Boston, maybe up and coming in Austin, Texas, but the rest of the country is like starving for capital. And then even in a place like Silicon Valley, if you're not in the right industry, forget it there as well. So creativity is being, let's just say, it's not getting the nourishment it needs. And then when you look at the vegan economy, there's 2,000 vegan entrepreneurs seeking capital today. And our estimate is that at best, 1 in 200 is going to raise any capital at all, just because of, not to blame the VC funds, but because of the way the practice of financing companies evolved after the formation of the passing of the Securities Act in 1933, the formation of the Securities Exchange Commission, and basically the removal of securities from basically normal business law and creating a specialized niche profession called securities law. So like Vegan Launch, we have 2 law firms. One does our securities law, so that's where our company is looking outward into raising capital from the American citizens, and to some extent external to the US, international. And then we have another attorney who's handling our relationship, how our corporation docks with the state. So that's business law. And again, before 1933, you didn't need a securities lawyer. And securities lawyers, they're very expensive, and partly because they have to maintain something called securities law liability insurance. Because when these securities lawyers, they make a mistake, it's a lot of money. It's a pretty big ticket if they are brought in for securities malpractice. And malpractice is pretty easy to do because the laws are convoluted, not clear, and there's a whole lot of them, and there's state level laws and federal laws. So it's a gigantic ball of yarn to untangle so that too, the real challenge, one of the real challenges in the United States for a founder is if you want to raise money legally, you're going to be looking almost no matter what, between your corporate formation and your legal documents, at best, $10,000. And that's a starting point for raise, just to have your legal. So then the question is, well, if you don't have $10,000 or you're trying to put that in your company, how do you legally raise the money to pay for the lawyer? And there are ways, but the sophistication involved to try to navigate these things and stay compliant with all the various laws make it really hard for anybody who's not already wealthy to raise capital, already wealthy and already knows a lot of wealthy people. Now, into that whole framework, I'm not the only one that realizes this is a problem, because I tried to raise money for an ecological venture capital fund in the 2000s. And I just got ground down by the prohibition on free speech and the legal fees and just the complexity of the law. So after 10 years, I just finally threw in my hat. I literally spent 10 years attempting to boot up an ecologically motivated VC fund. And during this time, there was the rise and fall of what's called Clean Tech One. So I was in the right place at the right time with the right idea, but and all these, there were thousands, like the vegan economy now, there were thousands of, or several thousand, at least 2,000 green businesses seeking capital to go solve all these different problems. But again, they weren't a good fit for the Silicon Valley venture capital firms, because those firms like tech firms that have a very high growth potential relative to the capital outlay. And when you're trying to solve like three-dimensional problems like that involve infrastructure, soil, machinery, now what happens is you're getting a high cost of capital relative to the potential financial growth. And that's why a guy like Elon Musk, he knew that scene, and he knew that he couldn't really build a company with the VCs, that he had to put in 60 million of his own cash before he could even begin having conversations about, Tesla's a very heavy infrastructure company. And, he really didn't raise all that much from venture capital firms. He did a lot of public raises. Part of the secret of Tesla is simply that Elon Musk had mastered the whole capital game, and he went to business school at Wharton for a while. I'm not sure if he graduated. One of my business clients, her office was next to his. I'm sorry, I don't know his history exactly, but I know he's at Wharton. So he had Wharton, he had a bunch of financial successes. And between those two, he really knows the finance scene inside and out. And even that, he almost completely crashed Tesla anyway, because it's just so hard to raise capital in this country. Okay, but anyway, inside of that whole framework of difficulty, there was the Jobs Act of 2012. And that introduced a new concept where you could make public advertisements about private securities. And the first one was something called Reg 506C, which said you can advertise to the public, but you can only allow accredited investors to invest. And for most people, that's satisfactory. Most people raising capital, they may not be trying to change the world quite as much as we are. Now we're getting to the point that I wanted to make about the distribution of wealth, because when we take investors as a class, a third of the wealth is in the hands of people who have less than $1 million in their portfolio. So that's non-accredited investors. Those people were excluded even by that new regulation 506C.
So just for people listening to this, I know a little about accredited investors. It's either you have a net worth of $1 million minus your primary residence, or is it 200,000 per year for the last 2 years? Is that the threshold?
Well, it's either one. I mean, there are several, but it's either $1 million in your portfolio, not including your house, and also you can't have debts against that. So your net worth minus your house is got to be $1 million, or you're making 200,000 a year as an individual, or 300,000 a year as a 300,000 a year as
a couple.
So
So
that's the rule for accredited investor. And, you know, that's, there are a lot of millionaires in the United States. About 1 in 10 families is, or 1 in 10 people on average throughout, 1 in 10 adults is a millionaire in the United States at least. And that figure is kind of old, and there's been a lot of wealth created in the past decade and even the past year. So the number could, the percentage could be higher. So that's a lot. And my calculation, so when we look at the stock market overall, the global stock market, of which the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, they're the majority holdings. But, you know, China's got an exchange, Russia's got an exchange, Thailand, most countries of the world with any, you know, viable economy have a stock exchange. Anyway, you combine all this together, and that's $100 trillion of stock assets in the world. And so, you know, people like wonder, well, why can't we solve climate change or whatnot? Well, if we take that and we break that down, we're figuring about 3% of those holdings are held by vegans, because vegans are, you know, they're more than 3%, and they're also highly represented in the investor class. So when you take 3% of 100 trillion, that's $3 trillion. And I'm not the only one that thinks that's the number. A lot of people who are more sophisticated and experienced in finance than me agree with my estimates. And then if you add in flexitarians and environmentalists, then the number goes from 3 trillion up to 30 trillion, because they're about roughly 30% of the, again, stock holding class actually cares about the environment as a high priority. You know, they're eating organic food, they're buying Teslas now, they used to buy Priuses. It's called the lifestyle of health and sustainability. So now, between environmentalists, flexitarians, and vegans, it's a $30 trillion pool of public assets. That doesn't even include money invested in, you know, currency exchange or gold or other, you know, precious metals or real estate. There's so much wealth in the hands, but the problem is, if you can't talk to them, if you can't market to them, they're never going to find your deal. And if you can't sell those, and again, if a third, so a third of, whether it's a third of a trillion, excuse me, a third of the 3 trillion is in the hands of people who are non-accredited. So as soon as we, it's kind of like this. Overall capital allocation is kind of like this. About a third of the money is in the hands, the third of investment assets in the hands of people who have 10 million or above in their portfolio. So yeah, that includes the super rich and the really rich, you know, 10 million, the comfortable, I guess you would say. Then you've got what I call the rank and file millionaires. That's 1 million to 10. Now, those people can't really participate in most of the private offers of any real, you know, the private offers that are going somewhere. And so, for example, they can't, those people are generally not going to want to make a $500,000 placement in some venture capital firm. Some maybe. And, you know, so they have to be very careful, because once you're wealthy, part of your job is to maintain your wealth. And if they put too much in just passion projects, soon they won't be accredited anymore. Early on, I met a guy from Switzerland. He said, well, he was a young guy. He said, my net worth used to be 2 million, and then I invested in a bunch of vegan startups, and now my net worth is 1 million, because he's making, his allocations were too high a percentage of his overall wealth. He put half of his wealth into very high risk, low liquidity investments. So, you know, when we include the general public, that does two things that are important. One is, now we're selling investment products on the same marketing channel as McDonald's sells hamburgers. That means, right, McDonald's taught America and a lot of the rest of the world how to eat in the way that they had in mind. And we can now see the result of that. So they're messaging, marketing, and then receiving money from the market. Now we want to build a vegan economy. If we're marketing vegan launches, marketing a whole suite of vegan investment opportunities and investment products, our marketing out to the world is also messaging about the vegan ethic in its own subtle way. Explain, like, somebody's going to ask, well, why do we need a vegan investment firm? And they'll say, well, glad you asked. And because how are vegans getting their message out right now? And I'm not critical of it, but we have to recognize that these types of messaging were enough to build a movement and build a market, but they're not enough to really follow through with the vision. So cubes of truth, where vegans are going to stand in a mall with TVs and trying to encourage people to watch what goes on in a slaughterhouse, or vigils and trying to get on the news. So these kind of actions that are newsworthy. So they're trying to leverage the media because they can't afford the industrial strength marketing that any normal business or larger business is just constantly marketing at huge dollars.
It's like
So,
a pure truth group of people trying to get mainstream attention, whereas KFC, they have a marketing budget, their advertisements are everywhere. It's really hard to compete.
You could say again, KFC, they're into creating the KFC culture. And we can sit and criticize KFC, but I got better things to do. Vegan Launch is marketing the vegan culture. And if we can at least get on an even footing, then the public will decide. Not everyone is going to agree to join the vegan culture. They're going to still stick with the KFC culture. But if we've only got the budget of volunteers and grassroots groups, we're in trouble. And when I first attempted this in the year 2001 in the ecological economy, I did some research. And in 2001, the overall budget of all environmental groups in the world was $2 billion. That was for everything. And the budget, the revenue, which is essentially the budget, of course, you can also add in capital, but the revenue of the single smallest one Fortune 500 company, number 500, was $3 billion. So when we look at just the revenue of the Fortune 500 companies versus the revenue of all the environmental groups in the world, we're in the wrong league. And the reason, and it's the wrong league because what could be more important than the ecological infrastructure that sustains all life on planet Earth? But like the US, we still don't have a cabinet level secretary of the environment. We have the EPA, which is just a political football and a place, for various presidents to abuse and blame, what I'm saying, it's just used as a leverage point on either side. But the thing is, what I discovered once when I was 20, I realized the only way we're going to really take care of the planet is we need to have large enterprises who's not that we're donating a nickel to charity for every, candy bar they sold, but whose actual job was to save, take care of the whales. And you could build a very large for-profit company right now whose only job is to save the whales. It could be a Fortune 500 company easily, but we need to be able to capitalize it. The business model is very straightforward, but now we are seeing interesting businesses occurring where you can buy forest land and just hold it and get a revenue stream. So these values are finally trickling into the value, like where the value is being recognized in cash flows, as opposed to the notion of the environment as a charity. The notion of the environment as a charity has been a disaster. And in 1904, the Forest Service was formed, the Sierra Club was formed, and General Electric was formed. General Electric is something like, $30 billion a year enterprise now. And the Sierra Club is about 100 million now. How is it that the General Electric grew so big and the Sierra Club only grew to 100 million in the last 116 years. It's because they didn't really realize that there needs to be an economy, and that, we need to consider this part of our economic heritage. The biology, it's not just a tourist attraction or a place of solace. It is all those, of course, but all of the environmental activists, even of that era, recognized just how vital nature was, but it was very hard to see. Now, when I was a professional environmental activist in the 90s, working a few blocks from the Capitol, we had satellite maps. You could just see the forests being munched to smithereens in the US. Also, you could see things like called the heat island effect. So it wasn't really until the space program that we could really look at the planet, see what we're doing at scale, and then just begin a discussion of actually managing it properly. But even in the 90s, you could get satellite data from one of the major environmental groups in DC. I'm sorry it's not on the tip of my tongue, but you could pretty much tell every tree in the world that was being cut down by location. They had the data. There wasn't really any environmental enterprise that could consume that data. I'm saying there wasn't a large enough environmental protection business that needed to purchase that data, but the data's there now.
Mm-hmm.
So we can maybe forgive a little bit because people just had no idea how finite the Earth was back then, and our destructive capacity was very high, but nothing like it is now.
Definitely. It's like when I spoke to someone about like the street activism, where many years ago people didn't see what happened in slaughterhouses, and now in the vegan community there's the street activism that brings that attention, there's awareness in media, and then there needs to be something after that to really make the difference.
Well, right, because see, here's the problem. The problem is movements. It's not a problem. The good thing is movements create markets. The bad thing is that corporations suck the energy out of the movement in order to take profits out of the market. And so now this is just breaking news. So the 2 bits of breaking news all involve the same company, Tyson Meat. So what Tyson Meat, they say, well, we're just a protein company. And they have a whole line now of their own. I think they had invested in Beyond Meat. They pulled out, and now they have their own line of plant-based meat alternatives. And you can say that's a good thing, right? They're doing that, but at the same time, the thing is that for them, that's just a flavor. And they just announced that the demand for animal foods has grown so much, they're building their first new chicken, CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operation. They're building a new one. Now that means they have no ethical compass at all. They have no concern about climate change, pollution, people's health, anything that matters. They're sucking money out of the economy that was built by vegans. There would be no plant-based protein movement if it were not for the vegan movement.
So for them, it's about consumer demand, profits, and just traditional business. Whereas,
yeah, right, exactly. It's just whatever people want to buy will sell. And the thing is, but it's not. If it was just that, we could forgive them. But I mean, forgiveness is, there's a lot of levels of forgiveness. I'm using this more rhetorically. I'm forgiving them because they are deeply ignorant. We can forgive Tyson for being deeply ignorant, but we have to look and see just because somebody's doing something ignorant doesn't mean we should allow them to continue. And now what exactly are they doing? On the one hand, they're sucking money from the movement created by vegans to save animals, people's health, and the planet. On the other hand, their animal industry side, on that side, they pay lobbyists, their own, the meat industry is actually the best activists. They have all kinds of nonprofit activist groups making policy from the local, state, all the way up to the federal level. So they're definitely activists. And what do they do with that activist money? attack the vegan ethic, attack the science that supports what you and I are talking about, get huge subsidies for their industries from, extracting money from the taxpayers to do something that's killing the taxpayers and destroying the planet. Making a situation where it's impossible for where they don't have to obey any of the normal environmental laws. They're the biggest polluters on the planet. When you really look at it, they're the biggest single source of carbon emissions on the planet, the biggest cause of deforestation on the planet. They're destroying the oceans. And so they are not like going vegan. They are attacking veganism. They're attacking vegan ethics. They're not unwinding their meat positions. They're spending more on meat because they're going to make more money. And that is unfortunate. But what can we expect if there's no vegan financial sector? And the thing is, I'm old enough to have been around and see the same thing happen in the environmental movement, is that whether they're craven or just, it's just business, whatever you want to call it, when the movements create markets, a lot of times the movements start to collapse, and that energy is not adequately channeled into the economy that embodies that ethic. In fact, another news item, a plant-based meat company, just sold the whole company for about 400 million to a giant meat conglomerate in Brazil.
So from my understanding, that example, or the Tyson example, they could, under their portfolio, they have a vegan company, but if customers buy those vegan products, the profits could go in to build another slaughterhouse. Is that correct?
Because a lot of the big corporations are holding companies. They've got a bunch of different brands. They're holding. The profits flow from each individual subsidiary into headquarters, and then headquarters can reallocate. Their job is to reinvest that capital wherever it's making the most money. So, if plant-based meat is growing faster, they'll probably reallocate. But it turns out that as fast as the plant-based protein industry is growing, as fast as that's growing, the animal product industry is also growing, because poorer countries are getting wealthier and they want more meat. They want to live like Americans. Of course, the diabetes industry is growing right along pace. In China, in Thailand, diabetes is just through the roof because they're adopting a Western style diet. And so how do we get a grip on that? The way we do it is with capitalistic financing. Again, we've got $3 trillion to play with, and it's really about deciding what kind of world we want to create, imagining what that world would look like, and then what kind of businesses would there be in that world. Some people might say there'll be no businesses, their perfect world, and I'm not opposed to that view. But I think it's a little harder. I think that will come from the kind of vegan consciousness, because when you're eating plants, you see things much more clearly. You're much more, the unnecessary violence just kind of drops, and that violence is not replaced with just sedentary passiveness. It's replaced with a very active quality of life, a very positive energy, a very problem-solving, solution-oriented, a more collective and respectful lifestyle, which is why I love working this field. Every founder that I work with at Vegan Launch, I just love all of them. They're the coolest people. And part of Vegan Launch, I'm trying to get to the point where I'm sharing my experience of mentoring these people with our members, with our investors. We need to work through a number of legal issues and structure the whole community. My goal is to train hundreds of mentors, and even what I call citizen financiers, who can walk into a place, any country in the world, look at the problems, the air pollution, the, human trafficking, all these things are tied in. There's massive slavery in the fishing industry. A lot of Thai people are unfortunately enslaved in the Thai fishing industry. So when you're eating fish, you're helping the slave industry, and this can be redesigned. There's no shortage of money. That's what I'm saying. There's 100 trillion a year, more or less, of cash flow in the world in US dollars. There's about 100 trillion in assets. We don't have to, what's going on is the animal industry is creating a kind of scarcity that then affects, that's what drives people crazy. Eating animals, bad body chemistry, bad decisions, creating animosity and scarcity where there's just no need. And I'm sure anybody listening to this knows that animal agriculture is occupying something like, I think it's like 80% of all arable or land and farming is going to feed animals. So we get rid of that. We're in a whole new phase of abundance and prosperity. This is the only path out of the mess and into peace and prosperity at a global scale that I could, if I saw a better way, I'd do that. And I've been committed to that my whole life because, growing up during the Vietnam War, we all wanted peace. And
Definitely.
So what's at the root of it? Well, it turns out a big part of it is just eating animals makes you warlike.
Definitely. Kind of looping back to what you said, there's like 2,000 vegan companies per day applying for funding. Was that correct? Approximately?
They're trying to get funding. I was an attendee at an awesome event called the Vegan Women's Summit, but there were 800 vegan women who submitted pitch decks to get the opportunity to pitch their business to the summit. And I probably some found investors that way. I'm not sure how many got funded incidentally, because I know there were funders in the crowd and there were funders that were reviewing them. But the vegan venture capital firms are literally overwhelmed with deal flow. They're seeing one of the panelists who was a vegan venture capital fund operator said she had viewed 1,700 pitch decks in 2020, and that her company was only ended up funding 6.
I'm sure there's a lot of vegan companies that they wanted to invest in, but they just couldn't because they had to put their resources into certain ones that were more promising. So maybe you can transition.
Right. Yeah, because as much wealth as any one VC fund might have, they're not really set up for the kind of throughput of leadership, you could say. I mean, Vegan Launch is, we're not there exactly yet, but we're getting there, where we have the basic tech infrastructure and we're building out the team that we need to, it's really a semi-automated mass training program for leadership on both the like you can be one leader is an entrepreneur is a natural leader in any sector. And then you have financial leadership, and these are going to be the people that structure deals or raise money or, can see how to put the pieces together. In the 2000s, I met this amazing guy. This is one of my favorite stories. His project was on the cover, I think, of the 1995 Earth Day edition of The Economist. And it showed there was a problem. The Panama Canal was filling up with silt, and if that kept going, then Walmart wouldn't be able to ship their freighters full of gear from China to New York City. They have to go all the way around, the south of South America, and the same with oil tankers, anybody else that was going through the Panama Canal. And this guy, he had been in the oil industry, so he had enough of his own money. He could run around the world. He was going to the insurance companies in Switzerland and Great Britain and saying, look, guys, if this thing fills up with silt, you're insuring these big companies against business interruption, force majeure, which is acts of God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where does silt come from? Silt comes from deforested hillsides. The Panama Canal is obviously the lowest land crossing between the Pacific and the Atlantic. And so there's hills on either side. Those had been denuded of trees. And so that raw land was just dumping silt into the Panama Canal. So he convinced these insurance companies to make a recurring payment to finance a $200 million for-profit forest ecosystem restoration project. And it turns out, if I'm saying these words, there's billions of dollars of forest ecosystem restoration industry going on right now that nobody knows about, because why? The financing of that is all happening in the private sector. So a lot of us are actually unnecessarily demoralized about the future of the planet because we're not hearing the news, because these companies are not publicly traded and there's no public, there's no real public discussion about their finances. So it's all happening kind of in the murky dark. And of course, the media is not out there searching for these things either. But I can tell you that ecosystem restoration is a huge industry, and it could be a lot bigger. And the intersection between ecosystems and veganism is pretty obvious to anybody listening to this podcast. But that's a $200 million for-profit ecosystem restoration project that was funded by old guard insurance companies. So that's what I'm saying is, with the right training and the right platform, we want to have hundreds of people doing what that guy did. Go around the world. Whenever you see a problem, there's always an economic imbalance. In Thailand, they've got the smoky, it's called the burning season. And this town of Chiang Mai, about 500,000 people, is uninhabitable for about 4 or 5 months a year. I mean, people live there, but it's the air is dangerous to breathe. It turns out that's from burning agriculture waste. A lot of that's going to feed cows that are then causing type 2 diabetes. And when I was there, I met with the manager of the Holiday Inn, which there is a 5-star hotel. He said the hotel industry is losing, the tourist industry as a whole is losing $100 million in this one town, 100 million USD every year just during this 5-month horrific smoke season. And then it turns out the healthcare industry, which is largely subsidized, is losing another 100 million a year treating chronic illness caused by breathing smoke for 5 months a year. So what can you do with a $200 million cash flow? Well, you can finance a $20 billion note, a $20 billion loan. So that means that negative cash flow could be used to actually somebody's got to bring the money together. Again, the guy with the Panama Canal project, he was able to get the cash flow from the insurance companies, and then he probably went to an investment bank and wrote up a $200 million loan. And that's how it got paid back. And so you're saying that you can go look at almost any disaster and find a cash flow opportunity that would finance the correction of this issue. And especially in Asia, India, Southeast Asia, China, it's hellishly polluted there now. A friend of mine, an acupuncturist in the United States, he's from Shanghai, he said his friends go to the cancer clinics like you and I would go for a dental checkup.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of economic opportunity in getting people a better life, because that's no way to live. I mean, it doesn't make sense at all to live that way, but it does make sense in a kind of way, a combination of ignorance and greed together. So
it's amazing. Like I've always been driven towards entrepreneurship to solve problems, where I have friends, they'll import, I don't want to say negatively, like import a piece of plastic from China, sell it on Amazon, and it's a business model. They make money there. But I was always driven towards businesses that make a difference in either human health, animal welfare, or the environment. And it's amazing how you said like someone saw that problem in the Panama Canal, and then financing comes in and is able to solve it. So I see a lot of businesses, vegan businesses, like in my situation today, where we have the know-how, the background, like how to make products, but then there's the lack of financing. We go to venture capital funds, like you said, they receive thousands of things, so they can invest in everybody. Angel investors have a limited amount. So maybe we could talk more about people who are not familiar with the equity crowdfunding side. You kind of talked about it before, where the Jobs Act, it opened up your platform to people who are not angel investors. So part of those trillions of dollars could go into businesses like mine and hundreds of others. So do you want to talk more about the equity crowdfunding side?
Yeah, sure. Vegan Launch is the first public vegan investment crowdfunding platform. And so when you can bring earlier we talked about minimum investments of 25,000, 50,000, 500,000. In investment crowdfunding, typically the minimum investment is $100. So this means you can bring in a lot of people. So you're going to educate a lot of people. The risk is being spread. So no one person is taking on a risk that is inappropriate for their wealth level. That's so now the risk is spread. Now that doesn't mean we just want to throw money at the problem. Vegan Launch tries to minimize risk even more by providing really expert quality mentoring to as many vegan entrepreneurs as we can. So the more investors we can bring in and the more entrepreneurs we can mentor. But the basic point is when you go for the whole market, you now sidestepping the venture capital bottleneck. It's a false scarcity of wealth. Why out of that 3 trillion is only, I don't even know if it's, if it's 2 billion. I should know the total number. A lot of money is going into cell tech and things like that. But, probably the biggest recent funding was 200 million for Oatly. And that's like there was 100 million for another plant milk company called Ripple. So, it's coming, but those are like the winners of the lottery. And then you get these weird situations like this. Like one of the entrepreneurs we work with is in the vegan egg industry. I'm not going to say too much more because I don't want to give away any confidential information, but she participated in a vegan pitch fest. And I don't really like these pitch fests because you can't have a pitch fest without it being a competitive space. So it turns out there was another vegan egg company from another country, and they chose that one to pitch to the group. So there was a winnowing down from 350 down to, I think, 7 presenters, and then they were going to pitch, and then they were going to decide, they had a kind of a minimum amount of money they were going to distribute amongst the finalists or the winner of the finalists or something like that. So what's the difference? This one, the one that we're working with, they have sales. Their sales are growing every week. The founder is a chef. She's an amazing person. She doesn't know a hell of a lot about business and finance, but she's in a situation where $100,000 this year would put her on track for being a $1 billion valued company in 5 years. Now, the other guys, they had 0 sales, but they had an MBA on their team. And the biggest concern of the investors was he going to jump ship? Like, because the positive was he had already had a successful startup and exited. So that's good because it's like, okay, the guy has some experience as an operator. And now, where am I coming in on this? I'm not saying they did the wrong thing by picking one over the other. I'm saying there's enough money. We should be funding both. The egg industry, there's 1.5 trillion eggs being consumed on planet Earth every year. It's a $220 billion annual turnover industry. The smallest Fortune 500 company in the United States is $5 billion a year. So what's 220 divided by 5 is 44. So there's enough room for 44 Fortune 500 vegan egg companies. There's no competition. There should be no competition. Anybody starting a vegan egg company should get funded immediately. And if you go through the grocery store, you'll see there's a bunch of egg brands. Now, one of the beautiful things I'm seeing if I go to Whole Foods, in the milk, in the plant milk section is taking over the animal milk section. And there's a dozen brands, and there should be 100 brands because again, now the dairy industry, that's about 5 or 600 billion a year. So there's, and how much would it take? When I mentioned the Vegan Women's Summit, let's take the top 500. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that 300 of them they don't even know what they want to do. They just, I don't even want to say that. I mean, it's kind of a joke because it doesn't, 500 or 800 hardly matters. Uber was started with $200,000. The company's now valued at 100 billion. That's a pretty big valuation, but still, if you look at, I just got the charts finally on the startup rounds for Beyond Meat. I'm so happy I found that because I've been wanting to make this point for a long time, and I'm going to be doing a video on this, but their first valued round was about 5 million, and now their current valuation is 7 billion. That's pretty good too. It's not 100 billion like Uber, but what's my point? Let's say we're going to give let's go for the whole 800. Let's assume every one of those women is passionate and has a good idea. Because basically, in my experience of working with vegan entrepreneurs, I haven't come across a bad idea yet. I've come across maybe bad execution or lack of commitment, but I haven't come across an actual bad idea. What is 800 times 200,000? It is it's $160 million. That's like nothing. Like Vegan Launch can raise 75 million at a time right now under the current laws on our website from the general public. So for $160 million, we could fund all 800 vegan women entrepreneurs at the same level that Uber was funded with their first round.
And the best part, you said, like, big investors say, when your friend, he lost half his net worth putting $1 million into vegan startups that failed. Whereas through equity crowdfunding, through another platform, there's Vegan Fine Foods, an all vegan supermarket. I put in $200. I think he raised about a total of, I think, 750,000 through that round, a total of 1.6 million or something.
Yeah.
And let's say I want the business to succeed, but let's say it fails, then I only lose $200 versus, let's say, an angel investor might lose $500,000, where the risk is not there. So that's what I love about equity crowdfunding in your platform, where I could put $100 into this vegan business, 200 in this one, and let's say put 1,000 total in 10 businesses. If one of them takes off, then I could still make a good investment and help a couple companies.
Yeah, and then also, if we remember earlier, I said 1 in 10 Americans is an accredited investor, $1 million in their portfolio or similar. And I said that vegans hold 3 trillion. That's about 4 million people. So 4 million people, and again, 400,000 of them are wealthier. I mean, if you're an investor of any type, you've got more wealth than most people on the planet. And so that's a lot of people. 4 million is huge. I know the Vegan Fine Foods. I mentored him a little bit. I'm not going to take any credit for his success, but we did help them. We sent investors over there as well. I think typically the average investment in one of his deals is about $500, and it's about just getting things moving, because the thing is, there's the already vegans, and that demographic is growing by leaps and bounds. It's the fastest growing demographic, sort of cultural niche, because eventually, within 5 years, all the environmentalists are going to realize, if you're going to call yourself an environmentalist, you got to stop eating fish. You got to stop eating animals. You got to stop eating dairy. You just can't. How can you get your work done as an environmentalist when you're basically giving money to the industries that are doing all the damage? And the thing is, not only is everyone going to recognize that the number one thing everyone can do to stop climate change is to stop eating animals, that you can do on your own. You don't need an act of Congress or a law or anything. You just stop. And also, it's the same thing, the number one thing you can do for your health. So, in the US, God knows if we're ever going to have, healthcare like the rest of the world. But even so, the countries have to, China is kind of getting out of the curve. They're beginning to realize that, for their population to be healthy, like they are getting behind the plant-based industry. They're realizing that eating animals is killing the Chinese people. And that's a big drain on their economy. If they want, they want to dominate the world, you got to be strong, not sick and lying around in a hospital. That's a real drain on, that might be good for the local hospital economy, but it's not good for world domination if your people are sick in the hospital. Here in the US, we call that GDP. When somebody's dying of cancer, that's good for GDP. That's nuts. That should not be counted. It should at least be zero, if not added as a negative. So, we're measuring the wrong things. And this is why America is in such chaos right now. We measure the wrong things. We invest for the wrong reasons, but we can't help it, because when you're in an economy, or when you're in an enterprise, a financial enterprise where the only rule is make more money, you're sunk. And so Vegan Launch aspires to compete in a friendly way, because I used to be more like that. I mean, I've always been an environmentalist. My first business was an environmental business, but I don't believe in war. I believe war is just lunacy. So even the people I don't like, I'd rather convince them to change rather than try to attack them and try to belittle them and blame them, because they're just ignorant. Like I said before, a lot of ignorant people. I was ignorant too. I didn't get veganism until only 4.5 years ago. So in a lot of ways, I'm no better than anybody else. I can't go around pointing my finger. But what we can do is this. When we're saying that the quality of our investment products, that, Vegan Launch is an investment product production company. We work with entrepreneurs and other financial leaders to create vegan investment products. Those investment products have a value and a goal. How many vegan eggs can we make? Right? There's clear metrics about the kind of successes that we can have. Now, when we come into the public arena about finance and we're saying, well, you can buy your investment products from so-and-so, or you can buy your investment products from us, which are designed around this set of values. And you, the consumer of investment products, you can make your choice. And also the crazy thing is, not crazy, but hard for people to believe, is that actually the more vegan the product is, the bigger the market opportunity. Because plant-based is cool, but as we can see, Tyson can get into plant-based foods. It's a very low, it's not a very deep context, because we've had a plant-based economy for almost the entire existence of humanity, but we never really had an animal rights economy. So the animal rights notion is much more profound, because let's say, okay, I want to eat a plant-based diet, but I'm still going to wear leather shoes and a leather belt, right? And then you can say, well, plant-based leather but eventually it's like, why do we need plant-based leather? Because the pollution, the suffering, when you finally wake up, it's like, we're like, the animals of this planet are like the canaries in the coal mine, and we're eating the canaries. That is the difference between being a vegan and being, looking at some of these other kind of paradigms or frameworks for deciding how should we live our lives.
Absolutely. There's no downside to it, being vegan.
Not that I found.
Yeah.
It's all been, everybody that I know who's been vegan, the longer they've been vegan, the happier they were about that decision. I just regret nobody sat me down and told me this 20 years ago when I first, I met a vegan. We had a vegan on staff at the nonprofit I helped build in Washington, but she didn't quite know how to reach me. So we were trying to stop deforestation, and a lot of our allies were hunters because they had a common interest in protecting habitat. And she said, well, I don't see why you think a songbird is more important than a chicken. And at the time, it was very disruptive to our staff meeting. And at that time, the vegan movement was much more siloed. The animal rights people were kind of there. The environmentalists were kind of here. And it's still kind of like that. But the thing is, she said, Mark, look, you're killing yourself eating that stuff. Why don't we start with that? Because if we had a bill that also, we're trying to save the U.S. Forest, or the public forest being destroyed by the U.S. Forest Service, the USDA forest, we were trying to do that. And then what are we supposed to do? Throw in a paragraph about no one should eat chickens? It just didn't make, if I go back, I would probably do that now. Or something.
It's a different paradigm.
Well, it didn't, at that time, it didn't make sense. And I lost the important message for myself. So I came to veganism much more accidentally through, I had a number of personal health issues and my energy was super low. And, it seemed like I only had enough energy in the day to watch YouTube. And there are a lot of vegan activists on YouTube that, were making sure that a guy like me might accidentally come across a video. And a lot of them were funny or, very educational, and all the vegan doctors or the plant-based doctors, and everyone was really out there trying to help me personally. And then one day I saw a video about what happens to the male chicks in the egg industry. And I looked at that, I said, I cannot believe that I've been a part of this thing ever in my life. And I said, this is it. I'm done. I'll never do this again. And that was it, as a vow. And that vow, one thing people also don't understand is that a vow itself affects your body chemistry in a very positive way. So the food only supports that, but the vow itself, the mind is very powerful in itself. And, I learned a lot about that in the years preceding going vegan. And commitment, commitment. One reason I like working with vegans who are willing to say I'm a vegan is because you're not fitting in with the culture anymore. It's a big commitment. It's not easy. And I found, I have two sons, and we'd go out for breakfast and I'd watch them eat eggs, and I was just going, oh man, and then we went to a donut shop, and not a single vegan donut in the whole place. Although you can buy vegan donuts in this town, but they didn't have any. Because why? Because they're out of date. And so I ate a donut. It had a little egg in it. And after that, I just thought, yeah, I said it's not going to kill me personally, but I just thought, I felt that sick feeling of breaking a vow, that break in my own integrity. And I thought, wow, what am I going to say? Because I was living away, my wife and I were, we divorced. And so I was really afraid of what to say to them, because it's easy to alienate people when you're preaching about veganism all the time, especially your own family, right?
Definitely, yeah.
And at the same time, I couldn't, it just felt so bad to watch them, or for me to break my vow just to be with them, which is another vow, right? I love my sons. And so one day I sat them down. I said, guys, listen, not that long ago, the whole cigarette industry knew that cigarettes cause cancer. They knew it for decades, and they fought it and they hid it. And they tried to keep that fact away from the American public. And eventually it came out. And I said the same, I finally got educated. I'm really sorry about the food we fed you your whole lives. And we were vegetarian, but then we moved to Idaho, and there's just a lot of hamburgers and hot dogs in Idaho, And so I said, I really apologize. I didn't know any better, but now I do know. And within the next few years, you are going to become aware that eating animals is just as bad for you as smoking cigarettes. And I wouldn't buy you a piece of food, in quotes, that came from an animal any more than I would buy you a carton of cigarettes. So when you're on your own, obviously you can make your own decision. But when we're together and I'm paying for the food, or I'm in your presence, we're not going to eat animals. What you do on your own time, that's up to you. And then I was free, and there was a lot of risk because it was scary, because what if they said, well, then in that case, we're not going to hang out with you. Then my commitment to my body and to the animals would have been in conflict with my commitment to my sons. And you know what? I was ready to take that risk.
It's a
And
very
that,
difficult position.
yeah, fortunately, it brought us closer. I didn't have to lecture about veganism anymore. I just made that one statement was a lot better than trying to make them watch videos or, indoctrinate them. There was no indoctrination. It was pure commitment. And one of my sons is vegan, I think. The other one, probably mostly so, but it's college. It's really hard to be the only one at a party not eating a hot dog. So, and we don't discuss these things, and it's not a point of discussion, and we're all very close. I love how it's working. They'll make their own minds. They may not ever be the younger son actually worked in a vegan restaurant. He's still working there. Throughout COVID, he worked in this vegan restaurant that stayed open because college more or less shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So why am I telling you the stories? Because the power of vegans are very committed people. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, you're going to get 100 reasons to quit every week. The only thing that makes it work is your commitment to see it through. So it's really great working with vegans because they have that baked in. They just won't quit because they're working on something much bigger than just making more money. Just making more money, you can shift from one thing, crypto trading one time, real estate flipping the next week, whatever makes more money. And I'm fine. People want to make money, they should do that. Those people build the infrastructure that we run on.
Definitely. But like you said, the big thing, it's a why you do it. Was that book Start With Why? And then that's the core of that gets you through the hard times. And as long as you remain on track, I found that's the most important.
Exactly. So really, in a way, my big why is this, because I've seen activism since I was a kid. The first Earth Day in 1970, that's where I became an activist. I started my activism then at age 10. And there's a kind of, again, activism works to a degree. And I'm saying, but most activism is either purely educational or trying to work the political system. And the political system is not, in any country, really, the political system is subservient to the people that can organize the economy. So after my 10-year stint in the nonprofit in Washington, I dropped out of the whole environmental movement. I said, I've got to learn finance. That's the only way. And again, the idea of public finance, that's capitalism in a sense was the first activism, because it allowed people to coordinate and work together. Because originally the kings and the feudal lords, they owned everything. They were the only people that actually owned anything in those societies. Everyone else was serfs. But then there was the rise of the merchant class. And so capitalism itself was a power sharing agreement. Is that great? It was a slight evolution. Did capitalists, they got involved with slave trade and every other darn thing. But it did distribute the power away from the king exclusively. And then now, so my point is that if we can get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of vegans to become essentially citizen financiers, financial activists, where they're now, it's one thing to tell people don't eat animals, but if they say, okay, I don't want to eat animals, but where am I going to go out to eat? And nobody wants to finance a vegan restaurant, and they're going to say, well, nowhere to eat. So I guess I'm going to eat animals because that's all the food there is. So we need to provide an economic path for anybody that says, okay, I'm ready to give it up, right? Our job as vegans on this side of the equation now, our activism is to, again, design the kind of economy we want, right? We got to live in that economy. It's not just enough to shout at people to change. It's hard to change. And Imagine you're like, I used to live in Moscow, Idaho, and down the road about 40 miles was a town called Lewiston. It was in a valley, but when you got in that valley, it smelled so awful. There was a potlatch. I think they made toilet paper there out of lumber, out of
Oh, wow.
wood. It was so polluted there. It was just toxic every day. Now, a lot of environmentalists just wanted to yell at potlatch. And of course, what do they do? When you come in yelling, they fight back. Because imagine you're the manager of this thing. You didn't necessarily go to some fancy college and learn about ecology and whatnot. And the thing is, if you try to do what the environmentalists are saying, what's going to happen is probably the mill will close. And now all of your friends in the community, you just put them out of a job. That's not an easy decision. And a lot of people do this. It's like, okay, look, I know the poison's killing me slowly, but if I don't have money, I'll die of starvation a lot faster. That's the decision most people are making in their lives. So to be a true leader in any of these fields, we have to create the economic transition for people. They're not going to figure it out themselves. It took me 10 years to figure out finance because I didn't, I tried by breaking things in a way that didn't, not.
So when it comes to the finance laws, you mentioned there's the credit is, then the Jobs Act allowed everyday investors to put as low as 100 in. And I think the cap went up from like $1 million to a couple million that could be raised. What limitations?
On March 15th, the regulation crowdfunding now allows an individual company to raise up to $5 million from the general public.
Is that per year, per round? Or is that total?
Per one round, and I believe you have a year to raise it.
And then currently, what limitations are there still? Because obviously that gives more capital companies. So are there other limitations that you think laws should change more in this area?
Well, first of all, if you want to raise more, you can use something called Reg A and raise up to 75 million. So and those are all public offers where the general public could invest as little as $100. Reg A is more the filing for Reg A, just it's costs more money in legal work. So what you're really talking about is getting the cost per check. The compliance cost is the biggest hurdle. There's two hurdles: the money for compliance and marketing. So I'll get to your question in a minute, but these are really important things for people to understand, is that just because we have these crowdfunding sites, not everybody that needs money is getting it because they can't necessarily afford to get on it. And the existing crowdfunding sites that are out there, they're kind of like mini venture capital firms. They're saying no to most of the people who want to get on their platform. Or if you go to kind of a lower threshold platform where they'll take anybody, again, the next problem is it's your crowd, and getting 1,000 people to do anything in a coordinated way is not that easy. So the other virtue Vegan Launch is bringing this is by aggregating, bringing all the vegan investors into one place. Now that means that the entrepreneur has a built-in crowd. They don't need to spend money. Like if you look around, you'll see that there are Kickstarter, that was, gift crowdfunding, not equities, but there's companies, they charge you $200,000 in marketing per million raised on Kickstarter. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. So what's that really saying? If you're a startup and you're trying to raise $1 million, which is not a whole lot of money, you better already have $200,000, which you don't have because you're a startup. So Vegan Launch, if we, when we get to 10,000 members, we'll be able to reliably finance, at least $1 million offers. We get to 20 or 30,000 members, we'll be able to really reliably start financing, 5 million and 75 million without the entrepreneur having to make an outlay. And we already have some, there's a lot of techniques we have to help raising money even now, even though we don't have, as big a membership as I want. So that's the benefit of this kind of platform, the training, bringing a group of, investors and training them so they're ready to act and they know what they're doing. A lot of community development so that we work together as a community, organizing finances together. So what are some of the other hurdles? So the biggest hurdle right now is that using crowdfunding in that way, if you want the non-accredited to invest, the rules only allow them to invest in a single company. And what most people would rather have is a portfolio of companies. Like Vegan Launch wants to launch, sector funds, like maybe, the vegan egg sector. And wouldn't, as a normal investor, I'd rather put 1,000 into the egg sector and get a piece of every vegan egg company out there than just, pick one vegan egg and another. It can be like overwhelm. The crowdfunding sites themselves can get overwhelming because you go there and there's like so many. And to solve the problems that we're trying to solve in the vegan sector overall, we need like a forest sector, an ocean sector, a dairy sector, a fund that is oriented strategically around all the companies and leaders in that niche. And right now, you can't really get the general public off the bat, and you can't raise a fund using those things. So you can raise a public fund. It just costs more like $1 million of compliance. We will get there. Eventually, we'll have a big trading fund on the NASDAQ for these different, all the sectors that manage it, a permaculture fund. And that's why I want people to join now, so that when we're ready to market these things, they'll be ready, or the people who are inside at Vegan Launch may have an opportunity to, there's many strategic investments that can be made in the private sector. You're just not going to get it when you're investing at the retail markets like the NASDAQ. I know we've talked a long time, so I'm not going to get any more granular on that. But that's my vision, is that we're building a financial community. People start out as investors. They want to invest $100. Maybe they're going to learn how to be an advanced investor, or they might learn how to mentor entrepreneurs and founders. So that way we can more quickly process the thousands, and there'll be thousands more. Every year there will be thousands more entrepreneurs. It's a big world. There's 8 billion people or so. So, building a trained community that wants to organize in the financial platform instead of the political platform. That's really what we're doing here, training people and doing it in a peace-based way, so that rather than yell, even at Tyson, they're losing. What they're doing is bad business in the end. We'll buy them. We'll pay them nicely to leave. They'll want to, because they're all going to be sick with cancer anyway. It doesn't make sense. I think one of Dr. McDougall's famous statements, he says, it's not a conspiracy. How does he know? He says, because he goes to the dairy farms. The dairy farmers are sick with the same diseases. If it was a conspiracy, they would not be drinking milk. They'd just be selling it to you. Mm-hmm. They're sick as anybody, or sicker. And same with Dr. Neil Bernard. He grew up on a ranch. People were dying right and left.
Wow.
So, that's the thing. They're going to wake up. Dr. Bernard woke up. He's an old guy now. He's young at heart, and he's probably got a better, his biology's probably better than me because he went vegan a long time ago. But what I'm saying is, generationally, the millennials and the Zoomers are now, they're the big end of the vegan boom, and it's just going to get more and more and more. And the guys at Tyson, they want to do it. Even the CEO of Tyson, he needs a place to go where he can be vegan, right? Mm-hmm. That he can unload his assets, wind it down, and we need to make a place for him to, once he goes vegan, that he can unwind without having to fire all of his people. We need to create those jobs to absorb all the people that are going to be quitting. That as soon as they can, they will. Right?
Absolutely.
It may be the only job in a city right now. And again, if you've been, it's hard to imagine, but they might say, well, yeah, all right, we're killing animals, but better them than the people directly. People are constantly doing kind of triage. We've got to get beyond this whole triage mentality of economy. There's enough food, air, water, shelter. Human beings can live in peace. It's possible. Vegan Launch is a peace-based enterprise. We're not going to use war techniques, even on any of the meat industry people, any of the worst offenders. We're not going to let them just get away with it. We're going to give them a way out, but we don't need to use violence in our language. We need to help them. They're sick. We need to help them heal, recover, and reform there, and have a new path that they would never think of, because when you're eating animals, you're not going to think of that stuff. It's once you go vegan, suddenly the solutions show up. So we're there. We'll welcome them, just like, right? All my vegan friends welcome me. I eat at least some animals.
It's a nice community.
Right. We have to have compassion for humanity. It's a culture of compassion, veganism. It's a little hard to be compassionate with your neighbor than it is with an animal. And that's the real trick of being vegan, is can we really be compassionate? And that doesn't mean being a patsy by any stretch. Peace does not mean allowing yourself to get your head kicked in. Peace is a point of view, and seeking peace is a methodology that's just much more powerful than the war motif. You get so much more done for so much less expenditure. It's an economic bonanza. Peace is an economic bonanza. And I hope that your listeners, if this is, we don't have to wrap up, but this is really my message. This is really why I built Vegan Launch, and why I will be doing it for the rest of my life.
Love it. And then I guess the final part, do you want to just say like where they could sign up?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anybody that thinks they might want to invest $100 in the vegan economy can go to veganlaunch.com and become a member for free. And as a member, we're rolling out free training for investors. In Vegan Launch, there's no real distinction between investors and entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur is a member of the investor community who also wants to build a company. Because now we're not just aiming for super wealthy investors. An entrepreneur can write a $100 check too. So everybody's a member of the investor community. Some may want to be entrepreneurs, some may want to be mentors, some may want to become citizen financiers. The first step is come and sign up for free. And if you're an entrepreneur, our mentoring program is also free. And as we grow, we are creating, I've been mentoring entrepreneurs in this niche now since we started in 2018. So that's 3 years. And it's getting down to it's getting to be on rails. It's pretty straightforward now, our mentoring process for raising capital. We're not doing general business mentoring only. There are other vegan business mentors out there. We're just doing, our focus is very narrow on capitalization for companies that need capital to achieve their goals, whether it's a single restaurant or you want to make the next, Fortune 500 company. Your Vegan Launch is the place to go to get the training you need to make the correct first steps. And right now, I'm providing the mentoring myself, but over the next quarter, I'll continue to do it. But much of my training will happen on our e-learning platform, because I say the same exact things to pretty much everybody. Get your, make sure you got a business bank account or a separate bank account from your personal, get your books in order. And really literally depending on how fast people work, within a month or two, they're ready to raise capital. And they get how to receive it. And when you're ready to receive it, it's much easier for it to show up. And again, there's such wonderful people. The businesses are good. These are good businesses because it's a rapidly growing market. Good time to be a vegan entrepreneur, but please be vegan. Our investors want to invest in vegans who are running vegan companies, not somebody that just wants to profit off of vegans without actually taking up that commitment for themselves. And it really does affect the quality of business decisions. So there you have it. Is if you're an investor, we don't care. I mean, we don't care if you're vegan or not, just your money's good. You'll go vegan. If you're part of this community, you'll go vegan, right? You're on the way. So, but if you're an entrepreneur, pretty much if you're trying to raise money from vegans or with the vegan context, you're not vegan yourself, you got to ask yourself why. It's like, and I'm surprised. I do meet these people, and it's a little disappointing, where I see companies where all the products are vegan, but the founder still hasn't put the dots together. And do you know what I say to them? I don't say shame on you. I say, look at the medical records. You're asking us to invest in you as a CEO. What's one of our biggest financial risks? That you die or end up in the hospital. We're just asking you to go vegan to mitigate our risks. If you don't get the health aspect of a plant-based diet, go educate yourself and come back, because we're not willing to take the financial risk of betting on a non-vegan entrepreneur. Your judgment's going to be bad and your health is going to be bad.
That's a new way to frame it. That's a very finance way to frame it.
Yeah, that's really, so now it's beyond it. Veganism is a paradigm. I just put up a video on our channel, by the way. People can go to the Vegan Launch YouTube channel on, I just put up a new video. Is veganism a trend or a paradigm? It's a paradigm. So much science on the health side, so much science on the environmental side, the math, the economic mathematics. What's a paradigm? It's a highly effective and replicable belief. In the video, I say, the belief. Right now, it's nighttime here. I'm going to bed believing the sun is going to come up. That's a paradigm. Is it true? I don't know. We won't know for sure if the sun comes up till tomorrow. But do I want to worry about that when I go to bed? No. So I live inside of the paradigm. It handles a lot of questions. So the vegan paradigm handles all kinds of problems that are otherwise you have to solve one by one: your health, the environment, world peace, mental health, bad breath, erectile dysfunction. Why do you want to solve those with 100 different little things when you just do one thing and that all of a sudden the pieces all fit together? That's a paradigm. It's a reliable, replicable belief that's right now pretty valid. And if you want to learn more about paradigms, you can go watch the video on our channel. But
definitely.
So in a paradigm shift, we want to follow that paradigm because that's where the money is, right? Nobody's betting on the earth being the center of the universe anymore. It took 150 years for that paradigm to kind of get overtaken. The mathematicians fought it for 150 years. And finally it's like, it's over. And that's veganism. It's just a matter of time. So what are you waiting for?